I call the meeting to order. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. It's a pleasure to see all of you here in the room. And thank you very much for joining us today to hear from some of our very own members about a new and exciting venture. You guys know Jake. I'm sure he's done many things in the past. So we'll have a discussion a bit about the new podcast, certainly, and how things are going there. We'll talk a little bit probably about your previous work too. And do you want to do the introductions for Shoko and Himari?
Sure. Is it? Oh, yeah, classic. By now I should be able to tell whether the mic is on or not, but testing levels. How does my voice sound? On my right is Shoko Plambeck, who is the co-host and reporter of this program. She started as an intern at the Japan Times and has done many things with her life. She had moved back to Vermont as we finally got a green light for this podcast, almost to the day, November last year. And the minute she got there, she got a message from me saying, "Would you like to come back to Japan and do this podcast about missing people, seeing that you've just left and said goodbye to everyone?"
And I was like, sure, that sounds really interesting.
On the left is Himari Siemens, who is a budding journalist, a student at Waseda. Waseda, right? Yeah. Waseda, I thought I might be slipping there for a second. She has been a fact checker and reporter on this. She has written for Tempura and other magazines. We're very lucky to have her. She is also one of my daughter's childhood friends. My daughter, Benny Adelstein, also participated in this podcast in a nepotistic way. She was also lucky enough to be here when Abe... Okay, that's a bad way to put it. She was here when Prime Minister Abe got assassinated, and we were in Hokkaido going to private detective school, so I sent her to the crime scene, which was a great family bonding exercise. So also over there is our producer, Tisanka, voted most likely to disappear before the podcast completes. She is a great producer. She has also produced an amazing podcast for Vice, which you can find on Audible, called Dark Side Japan, one of my favorite things that's ever been produced here. And there is Shoko's sister, the amazing Himari Plambeck, who has great experience in interviewing people for years and years, and is one of the writers on this show, and the most organized person on the committee. And over there is our friend The Box. The FCCJ has a studio. The acoustics aren't so great, so we've all spent many, many hours in that tiny little box speaking into a microphone. So we thought it was good to be here. It's been abused and barely working and held together by duct tape, but here it is with us.
I feel like we're going to have a demonstration of the box at some point, right? I heard descriptions of like how you put your head inside the box in order to record.
It's falling apart. I feel like today may be the day it completely dies, but we can try.
All right, we can do that later. And I have a bunch of questions, but would love to hear from you in the room too. This is partly an opportunity to promote the podcast and talk about Evaporated, but also it's partly a working session for journalists who want to find out more about podcasts and how they're made, what the business models are like too. So please come with your questions. But should we start with the video clip and the audio clip?
So we're going to do a brief audio clip, what this is about. It can explain it better than I can without running on. And then after that, we'll play you a portion of the fourth episode? The fifth episode. And while that's playing, there's a slideshow. There's not related to the video in any way. It has some photos taken by Raylia Slaby, that's her photo up there. We thought captures that sort of feeling of people evaporating in Japan. And then I'll turn it over to Peter. Also, when you're listening to the podcast, you might as well just close your eyes because, that's probably how you should listen to a podcast. As someone who started in radio, that's the ideal. Okay, first up.
What if someone close to you just vanished?
Disappearing without a trace is something that's been part of the Japanese cultural imagination for hundreds of years.
Nowadays, we have other words for it. There's shiso, to simply disappear, or johatsu, to evaporate. Every year, over 80,000 people are reported missing in Japan.
But dig deeper, and you'll find another side to this. People don't just go missing. Sometimes they evaporate on purpose. And there's an entire infrastructure dedicated to helping them do just that.
They say, I don't need anything, I just want to run away as soon as possible. We say, okay, we'll come get you now.
There are even manuals for evaporating.
We'll show you how to use every means possible to obtain public records for another individual. Of course, they're not legal methods.
This is Season 1 of The Evaporated, Gone with the Gods. Subscribe on Apple Podcasts to binge all episodes or listen weekly wherever you get your podcasts. What if someone close to you...
And now we're going to play you a section from the 5th episode called Manuals of Vanishing. And one passage on pages 84 and 85 about what you had to do to make a perfect vanishing had stuck with me.
The next thing to remember is not to tell your best friend about your disappearance plan. The private investigator will interview the missing person's friends and try to get them to talk by threatening them, crying, appealing to their conscience, or any other means. This will usually get them to fold and give up all the information they know. If you tell your friends and acquaintances where you are going, you should expect that sooner or later you'll be found out.
When Mr. X and Ota published this manual on how to disappear, I wondered if he knew how hard it would be to follow that advice, because it seemed pretty clear to me that he hadn't. After all, here I was. I'd found him. From Campside Media and Sony Music Entertainment, this is Gone with the Gods, Season 1 of The Evaporated. I'm Jake Adelstein.
And I'm Shoko Plambeck.
Episode 5, Vanishing by the Book. So you got like, the crime manuals over there. You've got the Zen Buddhism manuals in the hall, the spiritual manuals there. You've got manuals on how to dress over here. We are standing in the library of my house in Tokyo, looking at a wall of manuals. The room has no furniture except for a small floor table, just a desk and a large TV. But along every wall are bookshelves of various heights and sizes, crammed with books organized by subject. Yakuza, police, true crime, Japanese language, sex, and of course, manuals.
Why are you interested in collecting manuals books?
Oh, because it's such a weird Japanese niche, man. I mean, because this is a country where people just love to, tell you how to do things right, even if what's doing right is wrong. There's how to investigate crimes and there's how to get away with them. Read both of them and you have an enlightened view of the world.
Educational, maybe, but they can be pretty out there. I like these ones that you have about starting a religious cult.
Oh, yes. So hold on. Let me pull that one up here. Yeah, the most important thing in starting a religious cult is you need to find, some book that has, multiple holy books, like anything in Buddhism, and then you pick out one book. This is the book that's the only one that means anything. And, this is the God that you should believe in. We pray only to this God. And making that arbitrary distinction, that's how you start your own cult. That's the fast way to do it.
It's like cult leaders for dummies.
Do you want to open a detective agency or a sexual massage parlor, which is legal in Japan? There's a guide for that, too.
But we were mostly looking at one particular genre, manuals for vanishing. We keep finding that a surprising number of people vanish intentionally, and manuals and websites like shiso.com or vanishing.com help them do it. The amount of detail in these things is incredible. They provide a perfect blueprint for vanishing.
Or making other people vanish, and ensuring that no one comes looking for them or you.
I like this one. I think this is kind of like the go-to one, right? Kanzen shiso de jinsei risetto, which means completely reset your life by disappearing. And the subtitle here is really good too. It is the steps needed to get rid of your bothersome reality and redo your life, which is lovely.
Oh yes, this is by the Ohara Chosa Jimusho. Notice like it has this lovely cover because you got a detective on this kind of Mobius strip searching for someone.
Yeah, and you just said it in Japanese, but this book about disappearing was created by the Ohara Detective Agency. Let that sink in.
Don't you think it's kind of dumb for a detective agency to write a book about missing disappearing? It's
Absolutely not. That's great for business.
No. It's like the CIA writing a handbook of spycraft and giving it to the KGB. Detectives are really suited for teaching people how to vanish since they spend so much of their time trying to find people who are missing. These manuals seem like a joke, but they're really not. They're carefully researched books with charts, citations, sample forms, and detailed descriptions of how to disappear.
This section on how to become someone else is pretty incredible. I never imagined that it could be so easy to take on a new name, let alone know how to do it. This is from the chapter on becoming another person.
If you really want to vanish for a few years, you must hide who you are, use a fake name, and find a new place to live and work. The easiest way to do that is to obtain the identification papers of someone else. We'll show you how to use every means possible to obtain public records for another individual and use them skillfully to live your life. Of course, they're not legal methods. Let's face it, to live anonymously for years, it's going to take some criminal acts.
And then the author really spells it out for you. Here's their 3-week plan. They show you how to move your home address to another city and how to easily get a new health insurance card in someone else's name. And eventually, they show you how to use your new documents and new name to get a driver's license. Keep in mind that this book was written by a former private detective, Masanori Kashimura.
He's basically teaching you how to forge official documents or get them illegally and get away with it. That's pretty bold. The manuals report that flaws in Japan's family registration system and oversights in the national health insurance system can actually help you vanish.
Take the Koseki, which is Japan's family registry. It can go back hundreds of years, showing you who married who got divorced, and where you were born.
The thing is this, the family registry has no photos or anything that can easily identify the person on it. There's also no DNA sample linked to it, no hard proof to tie you to an account. If you can get a hold of someone's family registry, you can become another person easily. A point that is made very clear in the complete manual of vanishing. But you have to be careful about a few things.
Pick someone who is not married, with few relatives and friends. They should not have a criminal record. It's ideal that they don't have a bank account or any debt. If no one knows where they are for a long time, there won't be a fuss. The current price for a koseki is about $3,000. If you think about the difficulty of forging identification papers, purchasing a family registry is much more realistic.
Yes, but you can move your koseki anywhere you want. In Japan, the honseki, or registered domicile, is the place where a Japanese citizen is considered to have their roots. It determines the city, the ward, the town office where their koseki is kept. That's easily changed. Let's say I was born in Kabukicho just for the hell of it, but I'm in trouble and I don't want to be found. I can go down to Shinjuku City Hall and move my domicile to Kyoto. And if anyone comes looking for it in Shinjuku City Hall, they're supposed to tell them, nope, no Jake Adelstein registered here. Maybe a lawyer can get that document, maybe not. But if I don't want to be tracked down, the law is on my side.
The koseki, or the family registry, is one of 6 important things that can help you become someone else, or to steal someone's identity. Here's the list.
A local registration, a national health insurance card, an official seal that works as your signature, because in Japan, people don't sign documents to verify them, they use an official personal seal. A certificate verifying the authenticity of your official seal, a driver's license, and a copy of a family registry.
If you have most of these documents, you can join a video rental club, live a normal life, find an apartment, or even get a job. It's very easy. And here's the crazy thing. except for the driver's license, none of these proofs of identity have a photo of your face attached. They aren't photo ID. In other words, if your age and gender are roughly the same as the person whose identity you're stealing, you can go to City Hall and register as a resident there, and there's no way that the city clerk can tell if you're that person or not.
A driver's license also happens to be the one ID lots of people live without. You can easily live your whole life in Japan without ever driving a car, especially in the city. So if you don't have a driver's license, there's no way that someone can cross-reference your ID with your face.
Of course, some people aren't willing to take that risk. There are other ways to get by.
And that basically means lying low and finding a job that won't blow your cover or require you to show ID.
Find a job where you don't have to look people in the face. Work as a cleaner, a pachinko parlor employee, and or a construction worker. And remember, if you lie on your resume, you'll almost never be caught.
You're advised to find a job where you never have to look people in the eye or where people won't see your face. Things such as garbage collector, pachinko parlor worker, building cleaner, factory worker, nuclear power plant worker. These are not glamorous jobs.
But disappearing isn't glamorous. It's hard work to start over, and you might not have the freedom and options that you used to have in your old life. But the manual ends on a hopeful note. It gives advice on how to enjoy your life after you disappear. And my personal favorite, the super easy guide to vanishing, reminds you that when you are in such despair that you either want to die or vanish, it's always better to vanish. It's not a sin to escape and start over.
It is very important to spend time to heal your heart and nurture a new vitality. I am sure that the passing of time will take care of the pain. As long as you are alive, you will eventually find the purpose you need to fulfill the rest of your life.
It's the opposite of the manual of suicide. In many ways, it's a life-affirming work. Who doesn't run away dreaming of a fresh start? Especially considering that every single manual we've read on how to disappear starts by telling people to not give up, that life is hard but ultimately worth living. The authors know that many people who read these manuals are backed into a corner. They feel like they have no choices left. And some of these people reach for an even darker book. That's after the break.
Okay.
Thank you. That's episode 5. And congratulations. You guys are done with the podcast. I'm not sure if we said this before. It debuts next week. Is that right?
It debuts next week on the 12th. We are still working on it to some extent. We are still editing.
Is that true? Is that possible?
It is.
We'll make sure not to keep you too long.
No, it's okay. It's little things like little retakes, little swallowed words. I mean, for people who are doing podcasts, you'll discover that you spend a lot of time retracking things, maybe more than I think is necessary, because you kind of have podcasts where you have two people talking, and it's okay if you slur your words, but you also have ones with voiceovers and narration, and it needs to sound fresh and accurate. And so, you think you're done, and then you have to go back and retrack it and put in the audio. And in this case, you also have to deal with lawyers who send you questions in the middle of the night, which you have to answer. So, it goes on and on.
Great. I want to ask this question of all three of you, but let me start with you, Jake, because I know a bit of your history, but you've done many things. Of course, you worked in daily newspapers, you wrote books, you just got through this process of the HBO series for Tokyo Vice, which obviously turned out very, very well. Why podcasting? What brought you to this?
I started in radio when I was like 14. There was a community radio station in my hometown called KOPN 89.5 FM, your local community radio station. And I loved radio. I mean, it was fun. I did like a punk rock show, and we did little skits and sketches, and sometimes I'd cover for other people. It was quite fun. Although we edited with reel-to-reel and a grease pencil, which was considerably easier than what we're doing now. Last year I was like 52, and I thought it would be really nice to do something new and different. I mean, I didn't really listen to many podcasts, but when Josh Steen of Campside Media reached out to me and said, hey, do you want to do this podcast about missing people in Japan? And I realized that I had a missing person I wanted to find, which is my accountant, Morimoto, who took all my money and my shoebox full of receipts in 2018 and vanished 10 days before tax day. And he did that to several other people, including some people that I had introduced to him. So I thought, well, this is never be a better chance to hunt down Morimoto and find out what really happened. And so I said, yes.
Is one of the episodes about Morimoto?
Oh, he's in everything. He's the stream that unites the entire series. I could say whether we found him or not, but that would be revealing too much.
Nice. And Shoko, what about you? How did you end up here doing this podcast?
I am here doing this podcast because Jake invited me onto the podcast, but I've always had an interest in podcasts. I love listening to them, and I've spent many years working in media, helping write scripts, doing voiceovers, and things like that. So I found that I had a skill set already that translated over pretty well into podcasting, but it was my first time doing this podcast, and it's just been a really fun intersection between media and reporting.
So it's your first podcast for both of you guys?
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
Okay. And Himari, how about you? How did you end up with this crew?
So in the spring of this year, Benny, my best friend since I was like 7 years old, she told me about this podcast team that she was going to be working with, and it sounded amazing. And they needed a translator and transcriber, and I had previous experience translating from Japanese to English and vice versa. And I showed Jake my work, and he was like, okay, you're on the team. And I've been so lucky to be able to work with these amazing people, and this is my first podcast, but yeah, it's been really fun.
Debut, great. And tell us a bit about how you ended up with this idea. You mentioned that Campside Media came to you, and I think most people know this, but true crime is a very popular segment of the podcast world, and podcasts overall are taking off quite a bit. But why disappearing people in Japan?
Wow. I think people get hung up on the numbers. There are definitely places more than 80,000 people go missing, but we also know that in Japan, where the government loves to shape statistics the way that make things look better, there's extreme limits on who can actually report someone missing. So if your buddy goes working or your coworker goes missing and you go to the cops to report them missing, they won't accept that. And also in society, it seems very rigid and structured that so many people just sort of take off and fade away. I just always found that was a very interesting topic. There was a book that came out in France and it was translated in English called The Vanished by Lena Magloire, who I know in France, and that's a very good photography book and essay book, but it kind of skims the surface, and I really wanted to have an opportunity to look at the demographics. And not only that, the sort of interplay between the people who go missing, the people who make people go missing, and the detectives that look for them. I mean, it's a fascinating world of private eyes versus Yakuza, and Yakuza versus police, and police versus, criminals who are hiding their identity.
Yeah, can I step in here really quickly with that?
Yeah.
So I think that the podcast that we did is really unique within the true crime genre because it's an anthology. It doesn't just follow one specific case. It kind of is this, it collects all these different examples of evaporation in Japan to kind of give you an idea of what the landscape of evaporation is like. So I would say that our podcast is divided into maybe 4 different arcs. We have the missing accountant arc, which we revisit in a couple episodes, and we follow that and the reasons behind his disappearance, our search for him. And then we have the Yonige arc, which is about night movers who help people vanish in the middle of the night. So we have 2 cases of that and an interview with the CEO of one of those companies that we follow. And then the other arc I would say is the how-to arc. Episode 5, the one you just listened to, would fall into that category about, manuals that help people disappear. And then another one would be our visit to a detective school where we learn how to find people from the detectives themselves that go looking for these missing people. And the last arc would be our case studies, examples of people who have gone missing, and that gets into heavy reporting on those cases that we looked into.
I will have to say that when we went to detective school, I really sucked at trailing people. I'm so bad. I cannot follow people at all. And Shoko is so sneaky. She just blends in. She never loses a target. I was kind of amazed. So that was a learning revelation about myself, that I am not the James Bond that I thought I was.
Those stairs were hard to be fair.
So Jake, you mentioned you have a personal story, a personal connection to this idea. And Shoko, I understand you do also.
Yes.
Could you tell us about that?
Me? Sure. One of the reasons I was so interested in this topic is because when I was a child, my family got into a little bit of trouble, and we had to also escape. So we were in the States at the time. We were offered a spot in the witness protection program, but you have to cut ties with your whole family if you do that, which is not very ideal. So my parents decided to decline, and we just hid out in Japan for a while. And so I've always kind of been interested in the different circumstances that other people could get in that might make them also need to evaporate.
With me, it's more of an occupational hazard. I mean, I just know a lot of people who vanished. I mean, some were friends, some were sources. And I mean, that's a long story, which you can, if you were really going to stick around the podcast, and I have helped one person vanish because they needed to vanish. So, I mean, to some sense, I kind of understood some of this infrastructure, but it's kind of like my MacBook. I know how I can use it, but I don't know how the OS works. I don't know the code. And for me, this was an opportunity. Like, okay, now I'm gonna learn the coding of vanishing, and that was fun and interesting.
I'm going to ask one or two more questions, and then I'm going to ask you guys to come to the mic. So please be prepared with your questions. But you guys have now delved quite deeply into this subject, and you've talked about the numbers, which are kind of astonishing, that they say 80,000 people a year disappear in Japan, and I think you quote somebody saying, I think the number is 3 times that amount, which is, a substantial number of people. Why do people disappear in Japan? What are several of the reasons?
There are many reasons that people disappear in Japan. We weren't even able to cover all of them in our podcast. That's how many reasons there are. But I would say that the number one reason for people to disappear is because of financial issues. They're in debt that they can't pay back. They maybe lost their job. So people will disappear because they just don't have money and they have people after them, or they don't want to pay their debts, or they can't. And then the second reason that we saw that is a huge reason is women who are in abusive relationships that they can't get out of, and they're afraid for their life, so they will escape and hide out so that their abusive partner doesn't find them. And then after that, it gets to be more niche reasons. Would you like to hop in with any other major ones?
Well, there's shame. There was one guy who lost his job. He couldn't tell his family, so he basically vanished. But he was so worried about them that he would sneak down from the mountains every night and peer through the window, looking at them. Which is uniquely Japanese. Until the private detectives found him, and he was actually quite relieved to be found. There are lots of stories like that.
Right. There's a lot of societal pressures, like having to have a job. Like there's a lot of young people that disappear because they failed their exams and they feel so much shame from that. So it's definitely, there's all these social pressures that cause people to feel like they need to escape.
There are also people who are murdered and not found. There are also a surprising number of suicides. And you don't think of suicide as a disappearance, but as Professor Nakamori, who we interviewed, who wrote this wonderful treatise on vanishing in Japan, it's like 400, 500 pages, is to when someone disappears, when someone commits suicide and they don't have any ID on them, to that family it's a vanishing because they don't know who they are, they don't know where they are, and they may never know.
Mm-hmm. And then statistically speaking, out of the 80,000 people that are reported missing every year, the largest chunk is actually older people that have dementia. It accounts for, I believe, 17,000. Yeah, 17,000 cases out of the 80,000, which is huge. So it kind of speaks to an issue that we have right here in an aging population.
There's a very good book about that in Japanese called Yukoi Fumeisha by NHK News. One of my buddies who was on the police beat with me years ago, Yano-san, was one of the authors of that book. It's a great book if you're interested in sort of, the vanishing senile people that wander around. It's amazing that some of them, are gone for years and are found, alive, even though they can't really remember where they were.
Some are even found in a hospital because the family couldn't locate them, but they were saved by whoever found them on the street, and well, they can't remember their own names, so yeah, years can go by and they just don't know.
Yeah.
Okay. Questions? Go ahead, please. Yeah, you can step up to the microphone right here and just please, give your name. If you're a journalist, give your publication.
I'm a translator and interpreter.
Okay.
I just have some
Great.
comments on on language.
Okay.
So first of all, Shoko, now you pointed out the disappearances, which are, I think this is referring to the yonige. So maybe Japanese, native speakers of Japanese, the word shiso, they wouldn't really understand what the book is about. This podcast is about yonige, not people who disappear, but people who go into hiding. That's what your podcast is. Because you're talking about changing documents, changing the koseki. So that's not the suicides, and that's not the senile people with dementia who are in the hospital. You're talking about the yonige. So I think that for native Japanese speakers to understand, of course the listeners are not Japanese, but the important word here is yonige. As you mentioned
Actually, that's just one part of the program. In the great rule of people who are disappearing, there are yonige, there are shiso, there are yukue fumesha, there is kamikakushi. I don't want to piddle with you about in translation and stuff, but it's not about yonigi per se.
I'm sorry to say that I think that for Japanese people, native speakers, if they're in here, the word shiso would really not communicate what this is about. This is about yonige, the process of trying to disappear.
Sorry. If you could ask a question.
Okay,
that
so I
would be
just want
great.
to ask.
Yeah,
so
please.
I want to ask if you can. Why did you select the word shiso? Because it's the title of that particular book that you had.
Right. Our topic is evaporation, and evaporation can take many different forms. It can take the form of people disappearing by their own volition, which would involve in that very rich tapestry. Yonige would be part of that. And then it also involves people that disappear on accident or through means of crime. So I think that it is a very all-encompassing word that we explore in our podcast in many different ways that can happen.
Of disappearing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Johatsu is also another word for evaporated. There's many words for
I
the same thing.
understand, but the process that you were discussing here is the process of actively disappearing would be.
Right. There's many processes of when you just how people disappear. So they evaporate, they commit suicide, they're not found. Even the police have many different words for them. So we chose a word that sort of encompasses all of them.
You bringing up the police, it reminds me of, so we often don't get to hear the stories of the people who have gone missing.
Yeah.
And that's also in part because you can't report someone missing unless you are a family member of them.
Right.
And that makes the number of missing people and the stories of missing people very limited.
Okay. Yeah, I understand, but I just want to say that the characteristic Japanese vanishing, because every country has demented people and people in the hospital and suicides, but the interesting point is the process of disappearing, and that would be yonige.
Okay. Can I jump in with one other question? Because I think for maybe some journalists in the room also it would be of interest. Thank you very much. Thank you. Would be of interest. Because many of the journalists here have been working in other forums and other media, and podcasting is relatively new. What goes into making a podcast? You mentioned Campside approached you. How long ago was that? And tell us a little bit about the process of getting to here where you're a few days away from release. The couple things left to do.
So, Josh Steen, who is an excellent journalist, and I don't know if you're familiar with Campside Media. If people here listen to podcasts, they did Chameleon, Hollywood Con Queen, and they did Suspect, and some really great podcast, true crime stuff. But he actually contacted me first, I think, in 2020, maybe even before the pandemic. So we did a feasibility study. Is there enough here to make a podcast? And that involved weeks of research, what are the stories we could tell? So you sort of sketch out the episodes. So we sketched out episodes of, there are things here that we all know in Japan about people who were kidnapped along the coast of Niigata, right? Other people in the world don't know. We looked at, some famous cases of people who've gone missing in Japan that were later found murdered. We looked at the case of Tiffaine Varone, who disappeared in 2018. So we said, okay, here are the stories that we could cover, and then we started contacting people, and you list up the experts. So I think we spent 6-7 months just gathering reading materials and doing almost pre-interviews before the interviews. And that's part of the process. And what's weird about this one is, and Shoko and I, we all realize this painfully now, is that since you really can't subtitle a podcast, I mean, if you do it on YouTube, that's one thing, but it's meant to be listened to in your car on headphones. We had to get the interviews, put them into English, and then find voice actors for them. Then we have to sort of go back and make sure that the English, is as true to the Japanese as you can make it without making it like a mechanical, unlistenable thing. And it's very hard to find the right balance. We've had so many people working on this in many ways. We've had, not only have the people here, we've had Rayleigh provided some art. Meisha Brooks is one of our actresses doing a voiceover. We have 2 sound people. It is a colossal undertaking. I mean, could we have done this with less people? I don't think so, or it would have taken us 2 years.
And there's, of course, many different formats for podcasts, too. If you can go the Joe Rogan route of, we're just going to talk for 2 hours.
Oh, I would so like the Joe Rogan this man.
You in particular could. But you want the more highly produced,
Right.
We want to have crafted podcasts.
Right, this is very highly produced. I would say that like workflow-wise, just saying it very simply, we start with research, then we go into reporting, then we go into like the translations, then we go into actually writing the scripts, because this isn't like a one-on-one sort of podcast. We have to write them, and then after we write the scripts, Jake and I have to track them in a recording studio. And then we have to bring the voice actors in, and then we send all the audio to our sound person, who then, mixes it all up, and then we have like fact checkers come in and fact check it. So it's a very involved process that takes many months.
And the exciting thing about it, and also the frustrating thing at times, is, we can't plan it all because we don't know where it'll go. So we're starting looking for my accountant. Will we find him? We don't know. We went to private detective school. Will we actually learn anything? We weren't sure. Sure enough, we went to private detective school, and we managed to, one of our instructors was someone we'd been trying to contact for months. He also used to be a Tochigi police prefecture detective. So to doing this case of the French woman that vanished in Nikko, I was like, wow, here's a detective who used to be on the force, who knows how things work down there. That's a wonderful connection. And he invited us to come spend a day with him. So, there's... I really wanted to have everything sort of scripted out and like planned and not leave much to chance. But actually, you sort of have to follow chance.
Right.
And we were lucky sometimes.
Yeah, it's really lovely how you have this topic and you're researching on it, but also because it's this script and it's this living thing, like, everything unfolds, the events unfold, and then you're kind of recording that and writing that as you go. So it's a very fun process in that regard.
Great. Other questions? Yeah, please. If you could, a reminder, just please state your name and your publication, if you have one. Thank you.
John Boyd, I'm freelance here. I'm writing a novel about a British girl who goes missing in Japan. So this is on the periphery of what you're talking about. She's alone in Japan, so there's no relations. So it's the landlady who reports her missing. How feasible would that be that then the police would take an interest in finding her? That's one question. And also, you're talking about these people who want to voluntarily disappear. How many actually go missing, not because of voluntary reasons, but for all murders or whatever? Could you go into that a little bit? And how serious are the police in looking for reasons for the people who don't go this route, who actually do disappear, and the relations are very upset? If you could go into that a little bit. Thank you.
I'll answer your first question, and I'll let Shoko answer the third question, because she's best equipped to answer that one about how the police handle some of these cases.
It's a can of worms, yes.
If a landlady who has no relation goes to the police and says one of my tenants is missing, it's very iffy whether the police will do anything or even accept a report. if she doesn't have a relative. Now, if there's blood splatter on the doorway, then the police are going to look at that as what is called a tokui soshitsu.
But she's a foreign girl.
But it's a foreign girl. But generally speaking, you have to be a relative. You have to have an intimate connection with that person to file it. A landlady could do it because she has a financial reason, but the police are unlikely to investigate it. Now, however, there is a special kind of, like, I think they would call them special missing people, tokui soshisha, that shisosha, that if there's evidence of foul play or blood or something that would indicate that something untoward has happened, then the police might accept that. We found that if you go to the police, and we just to do it, we actually went to the police and said, I'm looking for a friend, he's gone missing. And they were kind of like, well, we're not going to take your report. We could go to his house and see if he's still alive and knock on the door. Maybe he died of COVID, so they're not completely unhelpful. But they don't like to open missing persons cases because then they have to do something. And there's a lot of people that go missing. I mean, some you might be lucky and have a cop who feels a wonderful moral duty to try and help solve these matters for people. But generally, even though the law says that you have to accept a report from this person, they're like, oh, no, you have to be a family member. Your second question was, I don't know. I do know that of the people that go missing every year, about 3,000 of them later turn out to be suicide. That's pretty well documented. In addition to that, there's about 3,000 people every year who are called gyoros. What are they called? Gyoro shibosha. And that's a special category of people who die in like a hotel or on a trip, and they're not identified. And the government, in the kampo, which is kind of the government official thing, they publish the name of the person, or they publish details of the person, hope that someone identifies them. I wish there was more data out there. I'm trying to get it out of the national police agencies, like pulling tooth. And Shoko can answer the third question.
Yes. This is kind of a can of worms. I'll try to make it brief. So in Japan, it is pretty commonplace for people to go missing. So there's a certain normalcy around disappearances, and that could contribute to one of the reasons why the police response on missing persons cases can be a little bit bleak. And in the case of a foreign woman going missing in Japan, we actually did one of our episodes on a white European woman who went missing here, and a lot of the episode is about the police response surrounding that case. And at first, they did not look into it seriously. They considered it to be probably an accident, and they had this bias in their investigation where they were finding things that only supported it being an accident instead of looking into other possible cases such as it being a crime. And because of that, the investigation was delayed, and they weren't able to find things in time that maybe would have helped the investigation go forward. And the only reason that they decided to investigate further into it is because the family pressured the government of their country into talking to Japan, into talking to the Japanese government, and that pressure from the government made it so that the Japanese government and the Japanese police force also had to at least look like they were putting on a proper investigation. And that kind of raises the question of, if this woman didn't have have a family fighting for her and didn't have a government behind her, then what would have happened to the investigation? If it were a normal Japanese woman, would the police have looked into it any further than they already did?
Yeah, we didn't have much trouble finding cases where a Japanese woman was reported missing and the police blew it off and she showed up dead later.
Right.
A death that could have been avoided.
Yeah, and they're very quick to say things like, oh, like she probably went off with some guy, or she probably got into an accident, she just slipped and fell because she had an illness. They're very quick to try to sort of dismiss it as, sometimes in a very misogynistic way.
If you are familiar with the Zama murders, in which this very disturbed individual killed 9 people in a short period of time and chopped up their bodies and kept the heads in a cooler in his house, that was discovered on October 31st, 2017. 8 of these women were missing, and several police departments completely mishandled that as a missing persons case, or didn't treat it as a missing persons case until the bodies showed up.
Shoko, I'm sorry, I wanted to clarify one thing. Are you saying there's a different treatment of foreign women and Japanese women?
Not necessarily that there's different treatment immediately, but more the case that how hard the police looks for you depends on how much your country cares that you're found and how much people are advocating for you to be found. And that's more likely to be, you're more likely to have both of those things, to have a country that cares about you being found and to have people that are like trying to fight for you being found if you are from a foreign country like such as Europe, a country that has some sort of influence over Japan.
I would say less diplomatically, the wider you are, the better the chances are that they might seriously take your case.
Yes, please.
Hello, Eric Augustin Palm, freelancer in Tokyo. Hi, Jake. I was wondering about the comparison to the US. Apparently, there are about 600,000 disappearing people there every year. So I was wondering if you in the podcast compare at all, or sort of try to see if it's easier to disappear here.
I think 95% of the people in the United States who are classified as runaways, but we didn't compare because we're looking at it as just, this is a Japan issue within the context of Japan. How does this happen, and what is the actual state of events? Because I didn't want to get into what about the Philippines, what about other places? We're just looking at within Japan, and really, what are the motivations behind this, and how do people vanish, and why is it surprisingly easy for people to vanish? That was what interested us the most.
Because it implies that it's maybe easier to disappear here. The podcast.
I think it is.
Okay.
I think it is. And until you get the My Number card completely across the board, I think 49% of the population has that. So you could also say this podcast is about the vanishing art of vanishing, because when we are all carrying that card, it's going to be really difficult to become someone else.
That being said, Japan also has much stricter privacy laws than in the US, and I think that also helps contribute to people being able to disappear. They don't even need to change their names necessarily, because there's so many privacy laws in place that'll help them kind of like stay hidden from the people they're trying to run away from.
Yeah, your criminal records are not public record.
Yeah.
And police who have unauthorized, given that access to private detectives and other people, have been arrested and gone to jail. So in a way, it's a lot easier to start over here. And they also have these things in the system that I don't know if they'll ever eliminate, where you can get adopted by an older person and take their name. So if I could find a Mrs. Tanaka, much older than me, to take me in, hopefully with a lot of money, and marry me, I could become Mara Nakamura. I could become a Jake Nakamura, and escape my past.
All right, thank you.
Other questions? Yes, please. Yeah, please.
Rodrigo Reyes from Suma Press, news photo agency. Congratulations for the podcast. Just my question is regarding some foreign parents who miss maybe their sons, their daughters here, and they try to find it through the police, but the police just say, no, it's done, the case is done, we close the case. So what they should expect to this podcast? Is this like a tool for to help them to? Do you present their interviews, real voices, or just,
we do use their voices, but the problem is that they're in Japanese and it's for an English-speaking audience, so they're sort of voiced over in English. For people who for people who live abroad and have children here who've disappeared and they're trying to find them and the police aren't cooperative, that doesn't surprise me, but I don't know how useful this podcast will be in helping them, except that we do explain that there is an obligation for the police to take these reports that they often don't live up to because they just don't, and there's no one to force them to do it.
Yes. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. Any other questions? Dave, please, McCombs.
Hi, Dave McCombs.
Hey, Dave.
Hey, Jake. Sorry to shift it a little maybe in a crass direction a little more, but what can you tell us about the financial arrangements? How much you're getting paid? What the structure of all that is? I'm just curious, and would you recommend this? You mentioned that you did spend a lot of work on it, and there were a lot of people. So, how much can you tell us about that whole picture?
I think that if I say anything about it, that I might vanish myself. I will say that this is a huge production, right? Sony Music Entertainment is behind it. Campside Media is fairly well established. We were certainly well paid. If I divide it up by the hour now, I myself might have done a better deal by working a pachinko parlor. I love the job. This has been tremendously fun. But if I did a financial breakdown of how many hours we actually ended up spending on this, I did not turn out very well. But it was good, Dave. If you can find a good sponsor, a good company to do this, I think it's great. We were very lucky. If we were doing this on our own, I don't think we would have enjoyed it as much.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Dave and I worked at Bloomberg together, so I appreciate the focus in on like what's the business model and how does it work. and I drilled down just a little bit more because you've done many different things. You've been on salary at a newspaper. You've done freelance work. You rode the sweet ride of HBO there for a while. I don't know.
Season 2 is coming.
Season 2,
coming,
okay.
yes.
All right, we'll do it again in season 2. But lay out the dynamics of the business model for something like a podcast. Campfire Media comes to you, so you're not fronting the money. They're helping you with the payments up front. And then what happens afterwards?
There is a kind of creator, royalty thing built into the contract. And honestly, I really didn't care. I didn't really look at the details of that. Not that I'm not, because I was like, great if there's a further development out of this, if this becomes a TV show, there is a kind of kickback built in. I never even looked at it. I was just like, okay, this is a great job. I know how much I'm going to get for this whole time. And of course, it ended up being like 2 or 3 months more than we thought it would be because we both got COVID. We all got COVID, right? I think your sister got COVID. Jesse got COVID. The only person who didn't get COVID was Jisanka. But much later, you're barely touched by a T. Not that that's a complaint. If you ask me how do they make money off it, I have no idea. I know that there's certainly advertising. There's an advertised version of this. There is all the episodes all at once, anytime you want. Yeah, the subscription model or the get the binge or got the binge or get the binge.
So you can watch it all at once.
If you're willing to fork up the dough. I myself have got addicted to one podcast and reluctantly subscribed to Wonderly because I just I need to know what happens next week.
Okay. Okay. And do you present this as the first season of the Evaporated? Do you know if there's going to be a second season?
The Evaporated as a series is going to go from country to country. So I do not think there will be Evaporated, Gone with the Gods set in Japan, though we had a lot of material we used. I mean, if it's a huge hit and Josh was like, would you do a season 2? I would say, yes, I would. Get me a real studio or donate a real studio box to the FCCJ.
All right, that's an ask for here. Any other last questions from the crowd? Yes, please.
Hi, Laura Polacco, freelancer. So my question is more of a fluffy question, I suppose, because I feel like if I asked any hard-hitting ones, they'd be like, well, listen to the podcast. Having done all of this and having looked at the mechanics of it, you must have wondered what you would have done if you really wanted to disappear. So I'd love to hear if you have come up with your own plans for how you disappear and where is it you would want to disappear to.
Wow.
Not yet. Wait, give me a second.
Well, one of the first things I'd have to do if I wanted to disappear is I'm going to have to get a nose job. One made me think that as I just hit the mic on my nose. So I was leaning in here. It's going to require plastic surgery, definitely. But, I don't know where I would escape to. It's a tough one. Maybe Mongolia? I've always kind of wanted to be able to, sort of be a Mongolian cowboy and speak a language that makes my throat hurt. So I guess that would be my plan. I'd move to Mongolia, get plastic surgery. Hopefully I would have a lot of money staved away somewhere.
Not a bad answer. Mine's pretty boring. I'm from Vermont. I would just go back there, get a cabin in the woods, do the off-the-grid thing for a while. Thank you.
Maybe I would go to a beachside town somewhere. Maybe not Okinawa, it's too touristy, but in a way I could blend in, perhaps. But honestly, I'm going to give it more thought. Yeah.
Before I turn the mic back over to Peter, I just also wanted to say my thanks to the FCCJ, especially to the librarians and the library committee. Thanks, Randy. Because I've occupied the studio there for days and days at a time. Over there's our huge box that we had to cart back and forth because apparently it didn't fit behind the TV. But it's been really wonderful, and we couldn't have done this without the FCCJ, so I certainly felt like I got my worth as a member here. And I'm sure the librarians are secretly happy to know that when this airs, they may not see me for a couple weeks. But it has been wonderful, so a hearty thank you to the FCCJ.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, guys. Thank you for that last question. That was a great last question, much better than what I had teed up. So thank you all for joining, and thank you, guys. Best of luck with the podcast.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you so much.
I think you guys are already members, so you get an honorary membership.
Oh, yeah.
to the,
We should say this on the camera.
Oh.
And also thanks to the FCCJ for giving Himari an honorary membership. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay.
All right.
All right. Thank you so much.